Okay, so because it is the month of Adar, the Jewish month of Adar, we need to speak about joy, we need to speak about Purim, and we need to get into it. We need to become a little bit more joyous, and the way to become joyous right around Purim is to try to understand what the joy of Purim is all about, to get a little bit of a deeper meaning. Remember that the purpose of Jewish holidays is not just to be celebrating the exact same way every single year, but to really celebrate properly, you got to go deeper and deeper and deeper every year to uncover a little bit more of the mystery. Every single holiday, every single Jewish time has a mystery behind it. And that mystery, the more that you uncover the mystery, the more that you connect to the holiday, the more that you connect to your Jewish roots, and the more that you connect to yourself. Because we don't celebrate holidays as commemorative events. We celebrate holidays because the holiday reflects a struggle that is an inner struggle inside of us. And somehow the holiday is supposed to focus our attention on a certain aspect of ourselves that we should be working on. The more that you understand a holiday, the more that you will understand what the holiday represents inside of you. So we now begin the Jewish month of Adar. And we know that the Gemara, the Talmud, our sages tell us, Mishenichnas Adar, when Adar comes in, Marbim be Simcha. Person should increase their happiness. And what the first lesson to learn from there is that you're in control of your happiness. And that perhaps is a lost art with many, but it's an important thing to remember. In Judaism, there are multiple terms for happiness, but there's a contrast between the terms simcha and sason. One is happiness, the other might be translated as joy, and again, these are just, what the words are not as important as recognizing that there are two different states that connect to happiness and joy. One, and perhaps you would say in English, this is more connected to happiness as being more of a state of mind, more of an attitude, more of an overall condition of how you're processing your life. Joy is something that is a little bit more festive. It relates more to your current mood, how you're feeling. It's a little bit more external. But this idea of Misha Nichnas Adar Marbin Besimcha, that when Adar comes in, you should increase your joy, makes the assumption, for lack of a better word, that every single one of us, we control our happiness. We control our joy. No matter how you feel things are going, you're able to access a certain inner joy that's always inside of you, that's always existent. And we should never become too dependent on externals for joy. Right? Very often, if you ask a group, you could say, what brings you joy? What brings you joy? And people will say a whole list of very external things. It brings me joy when when I'm in a relationship. It brings me joy when my kids, It brings me joy when I get my job, right? Whatever it is. There are all sorts of external things, which means that you are putting the most important emotion that you will experience in the hands of others. And therefore, it is out of your control. It is in other people's control. And the first step to discovering real happiness, real joy, is to ask yourself, what are the things that can bring me to joy that are completely independent of anything outside of myself? Do you have anything like that? Question for the group. Do you have anything like that where you can say at any moment, this attitude? I want you to think about that for a moment, but I just want to show you something. If you take a look at the Hebrew word, so it's Misha Nichnas Adar, Marbim be Simcha. You see that up on my screen? Besimcha. Now there is another Hebrew word that I want to teach you. It is the word for your thoughts, your attitude. The Hebrew word for your thoughts, your attitude is Machshava. Machshava. Machshava means your thoughts and your attitude. Now, if you take a look, if you line it up, you can see that actually the word bisimcha and machshava actually have the very same letters, which Kabbalistically that's very, very significant, because remember, Kabbalah understands connections between words by their letters. That was our whole series about the Kabbalah of the Aleph Bet. So you see over here the Bet, you see over here the Shin, you see over here the Mem, the Ches, and the Hey. If a person wants to be bisimcha, with joy, you need to understand how to fine-tune your machshava, your thought patterns. Question on the side, somebody's asking, is it connected to lack of anger? I think the Rambam mentions that. That is a wonderful question. However, we don't ever want to define something positive by a lack of a negative. Right? And in fact, whenever you're working on overcoming a negative trait, the best way to do that is never to try, I should say never, because sometimes you have no choice. But if you're trying to overcome a negative trait, think about a negative trait for a second that you would like to overcome, an obstacle in your life that you'd like to overcome. Right, so let's just say anger. We spoke about this, by the way, when we had the Musar series. But you can say, okay, I'm working on not becoming angry, but that's not a great starting place, because it's very hard. People don't want to live a life of not doing. It makes life just seem like a lot of don't do this and don't do that, and this rule's here, and this is not good, and this is bad, and you're a bad person, you should feel ashamed, So don't try to be a not angry person. It feels really good to get angry sometimes. But you know what? It feels even better to be a calm person. Work on being calm. Don't work on not being angry. So what can we say? What are the direct thought processes that you can implement at any point in time? It's not going to be the same for everyone. Everyone has their own thing. They'll probably be similar. But what are the immediate thought processes? If you find yourself, you're finding that you're struggling with sadness, which is also usual, right? We all have pockets inside of our inner worlds that carry both sadness and both sadness and joy. And if you don't channel your inner world and direct it where to go, then it will choose for you. And very often it will go to the place that you don't want it to go to. Right? So it's perfectly natural to be sad, and it's perfectly natural to be happy, and it's perfectly natural to bounce between those two things, even in the course of a day. But the more that you learn how to control your inner states, your inner world, the more that you'll be able to channel it to the places where you want it to go that are there at every single moment. And you don't even have to use any substances, but you have to learn how to use your machshava. So what are those thoughts? Jump in. And don't be shy.
You're asking about the thoughts that we use to just want to be very clear on what you're asking.
Exactly. To activate your own inner happiness, to move into it, whether you're sad or whether you're just neutral, but to move into a place of feeling happiness / inner joy. Or are you just dependent on are things going your way or are things not? Are you having a good day or are you having a bad day?
I mean, I think part of it is, and I heard this from somebody else, which was, if you look for something hard enough, you'll see it. So what he was trying to explain was that if you look for the positive spin on something, so even in a negative, something adverse that's happening to you, if you can see how it benefits you in the long run, what you can learn from it and how you can grow from it, then ultimately you're seeing something that happens to you as a good thing ultimately in the long run, and it definitely takes a lot of the sting out of it. But the point is, if you look for things in a positive light and you continue to do that, then it'll be easier to appear to you. But if you only look for the negative, if you only look for the bad in something, then that's what you're going to see, and you're going to see it a lot. So
okay, beautiful. So the belief that everything that happens to you has a positive side and that you can choose to focus on that That's great. What else? Anyone else have any thought patterns in which you can use this thought pattern immediately to put yourself in a state of joy?
Can I throw another one out there?
Sure, while people are thinking. As
Uh,
long as you're okay if people are only giving you half attention while they are thinking of their own.
That's perfectly fine. I
Okay,
don't even need their attention to feel my own joy.
fantastic. I will listen. Okay, go.
My own, I would say, is just appreciation and gratefulness. Sometimes
Beautiful.
gratitude, I would say, is a big one. So
Gratitude, absolutely.
even if you're feeling bad, just it doesn't take a whole lot of time to make a quick list or even a long list of things that you have to be grateful for and kind of reorient the way that you feel, and also using reference points, healthy reference points. So
Yeah,
not instead of looking at what you don't have, but looking at what you do have.
absolutely. Anyone else want to jump in?
Please, somebody.
Yeah, Dan? Well, that was just shrugging.
No, I was just making a.
Do you appreciate the question?
Yeah, yeah.
Evo, Jason, what do you think? Sarah?
I think for me, it's all bit like Noah was saying at first, that for me it's be more the learning experience that I would gain from it. When I'm feeling sad, I know I'm going through something, and feeling the way that I feel would just like lead me to something like somewhere else, where looking back I'll be like, okay, like now I understand how why I was feeling that way, and I've learned so much from it.
Right, right. And as Noah was saying it and as you were saying it, I think it's also worthwhile to think about is, do you actually really need to see that, or is it enough to just believe it? Meaning, if you believe that really every single situation has in it something positive, can you find joy in that, whether or not, do you actually have to see it, or can you believe that it will happen? Can you believe that it's true? And even if I don't see it, but I believe that it's true. I think if I can just throw things into the mix, I think that number one, I think that if you have things in your life that give you intrinsic meaning, things that are present every single day, I think that for me, a combination of knowing that there are things that are part of my daily routine that give me intrinsic meaning, prayer, even though it's hard, Torah study, even though it's hard. For me, this is something that, again, it's obviously I've built a family, so I have this. I have really a family which at every moment, I mean, it's a never ending opportunity to be able to be a meaningful person in other people's lives, but everyone has that in a certain way. So these are all things that have intrinsic meaning. As bad as my day is going, I know that I can make every single day count because I have these things that are intrinsically meaningful. And even on the worst day, if I can look back and I can say that I had these moments, that brings me joy because I know that I'm making something out of my time on this earth. If you could add to that things that not only find to have intrinsic meaning, but things that you're also passionate about that are meaningful to you, that can also bring you a tremendous amount of joy. For me, even something like learning with you, which gives me so much pleasure because we're learning Torah together, we're growing closer as a community. Hopefully, you feel that you're growing closer to your Judaism, to Hashem. That gives me a tremendous amount of meaning. For me, this class isn't only from 7 o'clock to 7:40 on Monday nights or from 7 o'clock to 7:40 on Thursday nights, but it's the thought that goes into it. It's the preparation that goes into it. It's the fact that we continue our conversations through our meetings, through Facebook, so we're building something together. That gives me joy because that's there for me at every moment. Because at any time I can say, okay, you know what? I have a class Monday night, right? What am I, if I'm going for a walk and I'm enjoying, going for a walk, but what am I going to think about? I could let my mind wander, or I can think, you know what? I'm learning with the crew, with the cafe night crew Monday night. What do I want to talk about? Those things make me happy because it gives me intrinsic meaning that I can tap into at any moment. And I think that when you have enough of that in your life, if it was only Monday night, if I had a Monday night, that maybe that alone would not be enough. But the fact that the combination of all of these things. So I think when you have enough intrinsic meaning, that's something that can awaken that sense of joy. Just another suggestion. Anything else?
Can I challenge that a little bit just for sake of discussion?
Yeah, sure.
Because it sounds to me on the borderline between the external things that you sort of talked about initially, where you said that it makes us more vulnerable in a way when you depend in your happiness on those things that are sort of outside of, I don't know, outside of you, outside of your control. And what you're now talking about sounds like some of those things are actually those external things. And I almost understood your initial comment as, the happiness or the joy comes from the fact that you are happy about the things the way they are, or your life the way it is, no matter what it is, so to speak, because you just trust that that's the best way it could be, and you're happy about that, right? And so
yeah,
I think to me it's like one more level.
That's an excellent question. Yeah, that's an excellent question. And so let's dig a little bit deeper into that. To me, if I would have in my head this picture of what a perfect family looks like, and I would say I always envisioned that I was going to have these perfectly behaved kids, that I would walk into the house and that they would run over to me and give me a hug and be like, "Daddy's home," and they would behave perfectly. Then I'm making it dependent on their behavior. And when they don't show up, when they don't fit this picture perfect thing that I always imagined, that I always hoped for, then I'm linking my happiness to something outside of myself. Now, it's true that probably my motivation behind building a family, I think that when you enter into a relationship, when you start a family, you're obviously thinking about the rosy, beautiful picture. But then, as we've spoken about in the relationship class, once you're in the relationship, everything shifts. You know that your relationship has moved into the next phase when it's no longer about the rosy picture and it actually is about the other person. Right now, my kids they give me an endless amount of joy. They give me an endless amount of nachas, right? Of joy, and I'm very, very proud of them. But my sense of mission from my family cannot come from the fact that they're going to give me joy. And therefore, I need to be able to get the very same amount of joy from the kid that is picture perfect, or the kid that is struggling in school or struggling with their behavior. Right? So therefore, I'm not making it's not the external situation that's affecting the way I relate to that. It's the inherent value. The fact that I have the opportunity to teach to others, yes, there is certainly the possibility, right, that all of you will lose total interest in the class and stop coming, and I won't be able to find any possible students. That is, in which case I would have to focus more on my own personal learning, right? So yes, that is possible. And in a sense, it's somewhat dependent on all of you coming and all of you showing up. But it's the fact that I have this opportunity to be in a world of Torah study, in a world of spirituality, and that's something that nobody can take away from me. That's something that's intrinsic. So that clarifies it a little bit more. Now, part of the build of being a human being is that we're built within, it's a built-in mechanism that always says happiness is someplace else. And as we're going to see a little bit tonight, and again, we don't have that much time left, but we'll start discussing it tonight, and then we'll go into this a little bit deeper next week. But really, if you look back at just the earliest moment in Torah, which is the history of humankind, soulful human beings as we know them, the story that begins with Adam and Eve, you really see from the very, very first story of creation. Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden. They're in the most beautiful, the most perfect place in the world. They're spiritually exactly where they need to be. They have life being delivered to them on a silver platter. They're close to God. Gorgeous place. They don't even have to wear clothes. They're so comfortable with who they are. They're beautiful, most beautiful, perfect existence. And Adam and Eve want out. They don't want to be there. They make a choice to leave that place, to get checked out because they're looking for something else. It's not enough for them. They wanted something more. That is a natural part of being a human being. And for us, the challenge is to learn how to recognize that voice that says you need to be doing something else, you need to be different, you need to be somewhere else, and to be able to recognize that that voice is the voice of the serpent of Gan Eden. You know, I don't know if you've noticed this, but the story, I'll share my screen with you, the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, it's actually compounded right afterwards when the second story in the Torah is the story of Cain and Abel. And what happens is Cain and Hevel, they both bring the sacrifice to God, and God accepts Abel's, and doesn't accept Cain's, and Cain goes ahead and he kills Abel. And God curses, or punishes rather, Cain. He makes a decree. And he says over here, I'll read it to you in English. Actually, it's probably before, here it is. Okay. So it says, Kitavod es ha'adama, if you till the soil, lo tosef tes kochalach, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. Na vinad tiyeh ba'aretz, you will always be wandering in the earth. And many of the Jewish commentaries who speak and who guide us as to just the inner human nature, they say that if you look at what that verse, what the pasuk is really, what the verse is really coming to teach us, is that part of the curse, if you will, of being a human being is that we're always navinad. We're always wandering. We're always trying to be somewhere else. And few are the people who can be in the moment that they're in and say, where I am right now, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. To the point that we know, and we've all seen it. We've gone on vacation. And you know you're on vacation. And let's just say you have all the money that you need in the bank. We've met people like that, right? They've got all the money that they need. Right? If they never worked another day in their life, they'd be just fine. And they're in the most beautiful place in the world. They're sitting there, maybe they're in the beaches of Hawaii or Aruba, and they're with their family, right? Their beautiful wife, their beautiful kids. And what do? They reach for the cell phone. They're checking in with the office. They're getting into a fight with their wife, right? The whole thing, they're yelling at their kids. The most perfect scenario that you could write, and yet they need to be elsewhere. So much of the struggle of being a human being, of trying to find happiness, is learning how to just be there, how to just be present. That's one of the major challenges. But that is really one of the keys to joy, to be able to look at the moment that you're in now and say, this is exactly where I need to be. But that begins, the way the first step to that is to be able to look at is to recognize that when you start feeling like, and again, for me also, I'll just tell you personally in my own life, right? And I think that I've shared this with you before. Right? When I'm studying Torah, I feel like I should be working. When I'm working, I feel like I should be with my kids. And with my kids, I feel like I should be with my wife. Right? I'm always need to be somewhere else. One would think that that's not normal, but it is normal because that's part of the challenge of being a human being. And it's our job to be able to recognize and say, I know you, I'm familiar with you. I know that voice in my head. So this really brings us now, at least to start speaking about the Purim story. Because the villain, who's the villain in the Purim story? The villain in the Purim story is Haman, right? Haman. Remember him? Hey, we don't like him, right? He's Haman. So he is like the villain of all villains. And the root of Haman in the Torah, what is his root? Where is he from? So it says that Haman is from a nation called Amalek. Raise your hand if that sounds familiar to you. You've heard of Amalek? Yeah, so Amalek, if you're not familiar with Amalek, I'll share with you who Amalek is. Amalek in the Torah is first introduced after the Jewish people, immediately after they cross the Yam Suf, they cross the Sea of Reeds, and they're in a high. Everything's going great for them. Finally, they're completely free from the Egyptians, and they're in a really good mood. They weren't actually in such a great mood. They had to go through a couple of stuff first, but the point is that they're feeling pretty confident with themselves. They're on the way to Sinai. They're on the way to receiving the Torah. They're exactly where they're supposed to be. And the Torah says, Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. And Moshe says to Joshua, pick some men and go out and do battle with Amalek. Tomorrow, right, this is Moshe speaking. Tomorrow, Moshe says, I'm going to stand at the top of the mountain and I'm going to have my staff. Joshua did as Moses told him, and they had this mini war with Amalek. Moshe is on the top of the hill and he holds up his hands. And when he holds up his hands, Israel prevails. When he lets down his hand, Amalek prevails. Moses' hand grows heavy, and they took a stone, they put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur, one on each side, they supported his hands. Thus his hands remained steady until the sun set, and Joshua overwhelmed the people of Amalek with the sword. So we'll get to Rashi's commentary in a second, but I want to show you something. Well, I'm not going to show it to you now because it'll be a little bit complicated to do it on the board, but unless I have it over here. Okay, well, here it is. I'll show it to you in the Hebrew. The Kabbalists point out that in Gematria, does everyone know what the Hebrew word Gematria means? Gematria means numerology. A lot of Kabbalah figures out connections between themes, between words, based on their numbers. So in numerology and Kabbalah, they point out that the word Amalek equals 240, which is the same numerical value as the word Suffolk. Do you know what Suffolk is? Suffolk is doubt. Doubt. This feeling of always doubting yourself, no matter what's going on. Doubt is the spiritual, that's represented in the Torah by Amalek, meaning the attack, the physical enemy Amalek in the Torah. Remember, the Torah is not just telling us stories about, it's not a history book. When the Torah teaches us about an enemy that the Jewish people had to fight against, that means that there is that internal enemy. Who's the internal enemy that's represented by Amalek? Self-doubt. Doubting yourself. Did I take the right path? Is this where I'm supposed to be? Am I doing the right thing? Always doubting. If you feel that you're always doubting yourself, that's Amalek. When does Amalek attack the Jewish people? In between the splitting of the sea and them reaching Sinai. They're right between perhaps the most profound moments. Everything good is about to happen. Hashem is unlocking upon them all of the bracha, all of the blessing. They're doing so well. They just crossed the sea. They just reached crazy levels of prophecy. This was the ultimate trip. And they're about to have it again. And that's when Amalek attacks. And the commentaries teach that whenever you're on a roll, don't think that just because things are going well and you can see with such clarity, you can see your path ahead, don't think it's going to be smooth sailing. Because there's going to be a voice that's going to creep in. And the voice is going to say, Danny, you're in the wrong path. What are you doing? You don't belong here. This is not going to work out for you. You got to be somewhere else. You're taking the wrong path. And if your name is not Danny, it might say something like B or Ari. Right? But the next part is going to be the same. It's always going to plant the seed of doubt inside of you. That's Amalek. Then comes along this descendant of Amalek by the name of Haman. I want to show you something very, very, very fascinating. In the Torah, right after the Garden of Eden, we'll rewind over here. We're rewinding. That's what you're seeing on your screen. Right after the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, they eat from this tree. And now they have this downfall, this lowering of their consciousness. And God calls them out on it. And the first thing that God says is, Ayeka, where are you? And then God says something then Adam answers. Adam says, well, we're hiding. Why are we hiding? Because we're naked and we know that you're coming to the garden. So over here, if you take a look, God asks, who told you that you were naked? Did you eat of the tree from which I had forbidden you to eat? Come on, dude. Yeah, you ate from that tree? Take a look for those of you who know Hebrew, who know how to read Hebrew. And if you don't know Hebrew, listen closely because I'm going to read it. Vayomer, and God said, Mi higid lecha, who told you, ki erumata, that you're naked? Hamin ha'etz, from the tree, asher tziviticha, that I commanded you, lebilti achol mimenu, not to eat from it. Achalta, did you eat? Did you pick up on any hidden references to the Purim story in that verse? Read it again. Vayomer, and God said, Mi higid lecha, who told you, ki erumata, that you're naked? Hamin ha'etz, asher tziviticha, from the tree that I commanded you, lebilti achol mimenu, not to eat. Achalta, did you eat? Do you see it? When God is asking Adam and Eve, did you eat from the tree? God says, Hamin ha'etz. The word Hamin is the exact same word as Haman. And the Talmud points that out, and the Talmud says the bad guy of the Purim story is not first introduced in the Purim story. The bad guy in the Purim story is introduced in the very, very first story of the Torah. The story where Adam and Eve are exactly where they're supposed to be, the Garden of Eden, exactly the state they're supposed to be. And yet this snake, this serpent comes in and says, you're not supposed to be here. Do something, check out. Life is going to be better elsewhere. And they do, and they listen. And God says, Hamin ha'etz, you ate from the tree. That's the power of Haman. That's the power of Amalek. The power of Amalek is the power that sets you off course when you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, when you're exactly where you're supposed to be, when all you have to do is breathe in and say, this is it, right now, right? At 7:39 on Monday evening, right now you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing with the exact people that you're supposed to be with. There's no place else to be. The entire world right now could be under a nuclear attack. But for us, we're learning Torah together. And when I'm going to go up and put my kids to bed, that's exactly where I'm supposed to be. And all hell could be breaking loose, but that's where I need to be. And whatever you're doing to be there at that moment, anything that takes you away from that moment, that's the power of Amalek. That's the power of Haman. That's what drains our energy. That's what drains our joy. Because the biggest thing that drains our joy is this voice inside of us that says, it's supposed to be different. You're supposed to be somewhere else. So that's the first key to joy. And by the way, we have to stop now. But next week, in next week's class, I'm going to show you that this is actually not the only hint to the Purim story in that very, very first story of the Torah, but there's actually another fascinating story behind the story. And actually, in next week's class, we're going to see that, believe it or not, the birth of real, genuine, holy feminism actually begins in the Purim story. That'll be a fascinating class. But again, it was important at least to set the groundwork and first introduce the bad guy, and that is Haman and Amalek, and see where that is connected to the Purim story.